Luke touched the old vase in front of him and watched it wobble back and forth. The edge of its base hit the tabletop again and again, getting faster and faster while the noise seemed to echo through the small house. This shit was boring, he thought, and stepped away and slowly walked out of the living room, past the door leading down into the basement and toward the kitchen and dining spaces. The small house had once been his. A long, long time ago, it felt like. Back then, it had looked a bit different. Other furniture, a brighter wallpaper, and more slippery stairs leading down into the basement, he added with a pained grin, which had led to his demise. Luke shook his head and put out his hand to touch the wood of one of the chairs standing in a dining area. It had happened to him completely randomly. One minute he had thought about getting some tools from the basement. Then he had slipped and fallen, and the next thing he remembered was this sharp pain before he opened his eyes and realized that the world had changed. He had no longer been able to feel the temperature or see the colors very well, and as he had looked down, he had seen his own body, dead at the bottom of the stairs. Of course, seeing himself like that had shocked him, even made him spiral completely out of control. But with no one around, his shouts had simply echoed back from the walls, uselessly. He had screamed and shouted for what felt like days until he finally had to admit to himself that no one would be coming to take him away from here. So he stayed next to his body, keeping watch over that piece of flesh and bones that started to rot. He had watched it closely, had seen the flies coming and going, had even witnessed his once clear skin bloating and decomposing. 2 weeks it had taken someone to notice, and by the time people had broken down the door, he had been thoroughly agitated. Luke had screamed at them, had tried to pick up stuff and throw it, but his hands hadn't been able to even brush against a single object. So he had sat down on the basement floor and watched the people holding their noses as they stepped around his dead body, then slowly worked on taking it away. Some of the people had seemed scared, others disgusted. He hadn't been able to smell it, but judging by their faces, Luke knew that the stench had to be abysmal. It was a small victory, of course, but seeing them struggling had lightened his mood quite a bit. Far more than it would have had he still been alive. His emotions seemed far too unstable even now. He was liable to switch from laughing at something out loud to extreme bouts of anger in a matter of seconds. Luke touched a chair and gave it a shove. Its back hit the table, and the sound echoed through the room. What the hell was he still doing here? Back then, when they had taken his body, he had tried to follow them, but somehow he couldn't go out. As soon as he had tried to cross the threshold, some kind of invisible wall had stopped him, locked him in while he had screamed and cried in pain and fear. Some of the people had turned and looked in his direction at the sound, and that had been his first sign that there were humans that could at least somehow hear him. He had spent the next half a year pacing around the house as people came and went, but no one had bothered to even try and find him. Luke was sure he would have completely lost it long ago if it hadn't been for Agnes, the next owner of the house. A little old lady who had moved in among a trove of men and women carrying stuff into the building he had once called his home. He had tried to resist them at first, had screamed at them, and even managed to push over one of the boxes, but the people had simply carried on as if nothing had happened. Luke still remembered the rage he had felt. They had invaded this place without his permission, had brought in stuff that shouldn't be here. And through this rage, he had started to feel strangely free. With every new outburst, he had felt the agony of his existence lessening. At every scream, the silence that had dominated his afterlife had been pushed back a bit. And as the last man had left the home, he had given in and slammed the door behind him. The light above had flickered as he'd stood there, then suddenly heard something and whirled around. Luke still remembered the sight so clearly. Just 3 steps back, he had seen the figure standing there. Agnes. This frail old lady had looked at the door that had been slammed shut with trepidation and said 4 simple words to him. "Everything is okay now." At this moment, he had thought she'd been talking to him. With those thick glasses and a small blanket draped over her body, she had looked so completely harmless that Luke's rage had evaporated immediately. Then she repeated those words. "Everything is okay now." He had shouted at her, screamed words that had long since lost their meaning, and with every cry of his, the little old lady had flinched. Never before had Luke felt like such a monster. "It's okay," the woman had said, and with that, she had turned away from the door and him and walked to her bedroom. Luke had stood over her as she had fallen asleep that first night. She had cried for an hour before her breathing had finally become slow and rhythmic while he had knelt down beside her. He was sure now that this meeting had pulled him back from the brink. Maybe he would have completely lost his humanity if she hadn't intervened. Maybe he had somehow exploded and disappeared. But watching this old woman falling asleep and going about her day the next morning had somehow felt calming to him. He had continued to try to talk to her, but she never answered him. Luke didn't mind. With this, he had found something to do besides walking around and screaming at nothing at all. And slowly, but steadily, this turned into his new routine, living as Agnes' shadow. He watched over her when she went to bed, and had even tried to wipe away her tears from time to time. In the mornings, he followed her out of her bedroom and looked on while she made herself breakfast and coffee. He looked over her shoulder when she tried to do the crossword puzzle in the paper, then put it away when she got frustrated. And with every passing day, he got more confirmation that this tiny old lady was just as alone as he was. She never got visitors, not even as much as a phone call. In the evening, she watched TV all alone. Sometimes she would read books or do some crocheting, even though Luke never found out for whom she did it, since everything she finished got directly dumped into the trash. It took her a few months before she started talking. Not to him, he was sure, but out loud nonetheless. He listened as she, at first, complained about politics, then started talking about people she had once known and lost already. A husband, kids, former friends and neighbors. Luke even started to answer her, even though he knew she wouldn't hear him. It was just something he felt like doing. Another part of keeping her company. Slowly, he felt like he was changing again. Only this time, it seemed to be for the better. He could hear Agnes mumbling in her sleep and stroked her forehead. When she had a nightmare, he would softly nudge her to wake her up. Though the shapes on the screen looked strange to him, Luke even started enjoying Agnes' soap opera every night on TV. He felt content, maybe even happy. The times when she left in her car to do the shopping were now the only periods when he couldn't be with her, and more than once Luke caught himself waiting by the door for her to return. It wasn't healthy, he knew, but somehow her existence had alleviated much of the pain that had plagued him all this time. Weeks passed, turned into months and years. Luke had time enough to get comfortable interacting with his environment. In summer, he would turn on the AC. During winter storms, he'd walk around the house and close the windows Agnes had forgotten. Once he even had to get rid of someone trying to break into the place while the old lady slept. He had heard it clearly, the sound of someone sneaking up to the door and rattling the lock. At first, Luke had thought about waking Agnes up to let her deal with it. But after looking down at her sleeping face, he had decided that she didn't need to be bothered with stuff like that. One hit from him, shaking the front door, had made the person on the other side yelp and run away. He still smiled to himself as he remembered that night. Only thing was, time didn't stop for either of them. Gradually, he could see it affecting Agnes, and it almost broke his heart. She started walking more slowly, dragged one of her legs from time to time. More than once she forgot something on the stove, and Luke had to turn it off before it could burn. He could hear her labored breathing at night, and then her cries when she woke up. Luke told himself that it wouldn't be long now, that sooner or later she simply wouldn't wake up anymore. At least, that was what he had hoped would happen. He would have stayed by her side then, waiting for her to leave her own body and welcome her. They could have been happy living here together, right? But the world had different plans for him and her. It all happened on a cold winter day. Agnes got dressed after realizing one of her medications had run dry and had left in a huff out the front door. Luke hadn't thought much of it, had wished her good luck shopping, then had waited by the door. An hour passed, then another. The sun that had been shining through the window had slowly risen, then sunken down on the other side. Luke hadn't moved. He waited by the door. During the sunrise and sunset again, and again, and again. For a whole month. He had listened to cars driving by, people walking past, and the cold wind blowing outside that seemed to freeze even the air inside this place. Luke had felt it as well. The old dread and loneliness set in. Agnes had died, somewhere out there, far away from here, and he wouldn't be able to see her again. He had started roaming the house once more, walking from the front door to the back and the kitchen again and again and again. That was until someone arrived and unlocked the entrance to the house. Luke had rushed through the room, suddenly feeling hopeful, then had felt all his joy getting dashed as he laid his eyes upon the two people standing in the open door. A youngish man and a woman. Both were dressed in what could be called suits. One single pained shriek came out of him as he raced toward them. And this time, he immediately knew that they could hear him. The two people fell back as Agnes' pictures tumbled off the wall and his cry echoed through the whole house. They ran away without closing the door, but Luke didn't mind. He threw it shut, hoping that they could still hear it, then turned and started walking through the rooms again. The next person who came to the house arrived 2 days later. It was a man, old and grizzled. Luke saw him as he opened the door and announced himself. That time, he didn't feel as much rage. Yeah, he was devastated, and part of him still hoped to see Agnes return. But the figure standing by the open door made him hesitate. His eyes followed him, and this feeling of being seen gave Luke the creeps. The strange man tried talking, but got the door slammed in his face as well. This was bad, he remembered thinking. The first two he had pushed out had been normal people, but the last guy had come here not for the house, but for him. Luke felt the rage building inside himself again. More people would be coming, part of him knew. Someone had found him. From now on, they wouldn't leave him be. He pushed a chair again and made it wobble, then turned and walked back toward the basement door. The thing he missed most about Agnes was this feeling she had given him. Of being part of something, of not spending this time here alone and forgotten. Of being secure, sheltered in his former home. That last guy had been completely different. There was no doubt in his mind that he would try to get him out of here one way or another. What would happen to him then? Would he disappear? Or would he finally be able to wander the world out there? He highly doubted it. It was only a matter of time, Luke thought, then heard a truck stopping outside the house. That sound reminded him of the moving company that had brought Agnes stuff. But something felt off about it. They wouldn't have sold her house that fast, right? He ran into one of the small rooms next to the entrance and looked out into the upcoming night. The truck was white, completely nondescript, with not even a name on it. Luke could feel the strange rage building inside of him. It was like part of him was looking forward to a confrontation. They wanted to get him out of there, to destroy him. He was sure of that. Well, they could try, he mumbled to himself, and felt a hot ball of rage where his stomach had once been, glowing even more. The sound of hydraulic hatch opening drew his attention. Someone was moving in the back of the truck. He could feel the tension in the air, and his rage reacted to it. Luke knew he might lose himself to his anger soon, but he didn't even know if he wanted to resist it anymore. It might change him. Whatever would remain of him would have nothing to do with the man he once was. Good. Maybe this dreadful feeling of being abandoned again would also disappear. Everything is okay now. He remembered the words, the voice, the tone, and also the warmth the person had spread. Had she felt his presence back then? Known that he had been there? She must have talked to him, right? Luke felt conflicting emotions battling inside his mind. What would Agnes think if she could see him right now? When she'd been asleep, she had mumbled thank you from time to time. He had always thought she was simply talking in her dreams. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe she really had been able to feel his presence, even if only on a subconscious level. He had scared her that first evening when he had slammed the door. Then he was about to become what Agnes had feared if he gave in. Luke felt dread pushing down the rage. 2 people exited from the back of the vehicle with flashlights in hand and were coming toward the front door. He couldn't see their faces, but by the way they walked, he knew that they had come with a purpose in mind. A flicker of rage was still inside his chest, but Luke suppressed it with force. Now was not the time for that. He wanted to know what they were up to. Leaving the room, he slowly moved to the hallway to watch the front door. Maybe, he thought, but got suddenly interrupted as the entrance was pushed open with force. 2 flashlights hit his eyes and went through him, illuminating the dark corridor he was standing in right now. He could see strange devices in the intruder's hands as one of them touched the other on the shoulder. Got the intel. Looks like this is going to be a tough one. We've had reports of violence, and it looks like they left in a hurry. Check the rooms on the side. I'll head to the basement. The first one, the guy said. Luke moved back as he watched the 2 splitting up, then the man pointing one of those small devices at the floor before taking another step. Lucas Miller. The person directly in front of him said, and Luke suddenly felt a terrible chill. One of the devices on the man's belt gave off a beep, and the man started to smile. His hand moved up to his shoulder, where Luke could see a small radio. He tapped a button and spoke. Yeah, there's definitely someone here. Reacts to the first name on our list. The radio clicked as he pulled his hand back, and the female voice answered. Understood. Luke moved back further as the man continued his approach. Every few steps he pointed this device at the ground, then either grumbled or smiled. Luke felt his rage building, but for now, the fear and dread in him still kept it in check. Slowly but steadily, he was moving back, then turned and quickly hid in the bedroom. He could hear and feel the 2 of them searching out there. They were used to this line of work, he realized. This definitely wasn't their first time in such a place. How much did they know about him? He could feel himself getting more and more anxious as he listened to the 2 walking around the house. The man was going down into the basement right now, which had once been the room he had spent most of his time in. But not anymore. No. Somehow things had shifted and changed with Agnes here. He was standing by her bed, the same spot he used to be in when she slept. It had given him comfort back then, but right now... The door to the bedroom got pushed inward, and the cone of a flashlight hit the back wall. Luke stayed in place and looked on as the female intruder entered, then pulled another small thing from her belt, and watched it closely while she walked through the room. He could hear a beeping sound coming from it, quiet at first, but as soon as he lifted his hand, the noise got more shrill. Luke walked back and into the attached bathroom Agnes had used, while the woman was already calling on her partner, informing him of what had happened. Footsteps were ringing out throughout the house. Someone was coming up the stairs from the basement, and Luke felt a sudden chill. The contrast was too much. Agnes had never moved like that, never made such noises. Where was she? Had she died somewhere out there, far away from him? He turned and hid in the small bathroom while he listened to the man now entering Agnes' bedroom as well. The two of them were talking to each other. He listened to them as they started their real work. Luke heard something humming, and one of them finally leaving and running toward the entrance and the truck. The voice of a woman suddenly cut through everything else. Where are you? Luke could hear the humming of the electronics turn into static that felt like nails on a chalkboard. He could feel pain he had never thought he'd experience again as the sharp sound pierced his head and made him stagger. What do you want? He howled in pain, then hissed and screamed. The hum and static from the device shifted and changed, repeating his noises, but in a strange and unnatural way. Luke felt like his head was going to explode. The woman was still standing there, looking at the device, and now he could see her grinning. Got a response? She said into the radio. Luke couldn't stand it any longer. He felt the rage building inside him now bursting out. Ripping the door to the bathroom open, he jumped back out and could suddenly see a flash of green light. Something was projecting green dots all throughout the room, and now he could see the woman's eyes growing wide. Luke looked down at his own body. It was there. Visible. The small green dots shifted every time he moved, and from the woman's expression, he could tell that she could see him as well. He howled and jumped forward, through the bed and toward the intruder, who now screamed in fear as she saw him coming. White light hit the open door, and Luke looked over as the man came running into the room, holding onto something glowing. Smoldering. The biting, stinging scent of strange incense flooded the bedroom. Luke's vision blurred in an instant. He felt disoriented. He couldn't see anything anymore. His hands had almost reached the woman. He knew. But right now, he couldn't even feel her presence anymore. He howled and screamed as the rage consumed him. Somewhere, far away, he heard the front door slamming shut. The anger inside him boiled over. Even if he couldn't see them right now, they wouldn't get out of here. This was his house. They were the intruders. With Agnes gone, he didn't care anymore. He howled again and listened. Two people were running away out there, still inside the house. He could feel it. Slowly, the stench and mist of the disgusting incense were disappearing. The room around him came into view again. Both intruders were missing. Luke still felt the rage inside of him as he turned and listened. Somewhere inside this house, two people were breathing. He started walking out of the room. The door vibrated as he passed it by, and the noise of his footsteps filled the air. They were hiding from him. Luke hissed as he turned and walked toward the closed-shut entrance. He could feel it so clearly now. The force pressing against it, keeping it shut. His rage, his will. And they knew it as well. Everything they had done up to now had been planned. Luke turned and walked toward the small rooms next to the entrance. The doors there were standing open. He could feel something. A faint heartbeat. This room that had once been his study. If he had ever found someone while he still had been alive, he would have loved to turn it into a children's room. Old memories flashed before his eyes. Everything had been taken from him. His life, his freedom, even the only person he had liked. And it all ended with them. Those two hiding here now, coming into his home without his permission, hurting him. A growl rang out. Luke could feel this pulsing rage driving him on. They would pay. All of them. He stepped into the room and looked around. Agnes had put her own stuff in there. A guest bed, a wardrobe, one desk. Luke looked around and listened. It was still here. This heartbeat, coupled with the noise of someone breathing. Whoever it was, they were holding one hand over their mouth to muffle the sound. But it wasn't enough. He could feel it again. The anger. It was all their fault. At that moment, Luke stopped caring. All he wanted was for others to feel his pain. He turned and shot around, then suddenly heard the door to the wardrobe moving. Just a tiny bit, but it was enough for him to be sure. Luke could see it in the darkness. A single eye was staring out at him. The person in there could see him now. There was no doubt about that. He felt strong, righteous, in control. Luke stepped forward and ripped open the door to the wardrobe. The man screamed as he got grabbed and pulled up into the air. Luke was grinning from ear to ear. Through the pain and the fear. The man continued to struggle and tried to cry out for help. But they both knew there was no point. Luke's hands grabbed hold of the head and started turning it. He took his time, relished in the fear and pain of his victim, washing away his own agony in the process. Somewhere behind him, the entrance to the house unlocked. But he didn't care. This was all he needed, all he wanted. Finally, a bit of revenge. The body of the man, now lifeless, hit the floor with a thud as the truck peeled out of the driveway and raced down the street. More would be coming. Luke knew. Soon. But it didn't matter. For now, he had won. Luke could see a cowering figure in the corner of the room, looking over terrified at his dead body still on the floor. They would have so much fun, he told himself, as he turned and started hunting the man.